From putting the record straight for Francis Ngannou's absence from the octagon to ripping into the UFC boss for promoting gimmicks, here's why Ariel Helwani blasted Dana White. The host of the MMA Hour was having none of the false narrative on the Predator, and he took it upon himself to tell the fans what really went on with Ngannou. Ariel talked about how Dana had been pushing the idea that his former heavyweight champ hasn't fought in over 18 months, but people forgot that he's coming off a major knee surgery. Before he tore his ACL, Francis fought twice in 2019, and then in May 2020. After that, you all know that the pandemic restrictions didn't make it easy for the UFC to even make the fights. Still, Ngannou was banging up the drum for a fight right after his 22nd KO of Jairzinho Rozenstruik because he wanted Jon Jones to come back to the octagon to fight for the title. That didn't happen, so he went on ahead and took the fight with Stipe Miocic in March 2021 and then stepped into the cage with Ciryl Gane in January 2022 while nursing that knee injury. Helwani also did a little math for his viewers and said that during those 3 years, between February 2019 and January 2022, Francis competed 5 times. So now the narrative that Dana's been pushing how he hasn't fought in so long is bullshit, because he obviously had to recover from that surgery and was a free agent dealing with a lot of stuff regarding his contract too. Helwani wasn't also very pleased with Dana saying that Francis is afraid to fight Jones. This was a man who left Cameroon with absolutely nothing. He swam through shark-infested waters, was arrested, put into jail, dropped in the middle of a desert multiple times, and had to sleep in a parking garage just so he could chase his dream in France. His whole life story is something out of a movie, and Francis survived all of that, somehow still managing to make it all the way to the top. So saying that a guy who has put his life on the line many times doesn't want to take risks doesn't really make sense. Maybe Dana needs to be reminded of Ngannou's story to make him stop telling lies about how he's afraid of a little old Jon Jones. Ariel was really ticked off by Dana's smear campaign, and he believes that the UFC boss is doing this because Francis walked away from the promotion with the heavyweight title, telling Dana on his face that he just won't sell himself for free tickets and front row seats to the UFC events. It looks like Helwani was done with White going after Ngannou like that over and over again, because the boss started to do that when the Predator parted ways with the UFC at the end of 2022. Dana wanted to keep Francis around. No questions about that. Jon versus Ngannou would have been one of the biggest fights at heavyweight, and both the fighters wanted to make it happen. But Francis had some conditions. His 8-fight contract was already out, and Dana was just trying to keep him locked down with the Champions Clause. Ngannou was ready to extend the contract for a couple of more fights so that he can chase his boxing dreams later. He also asked for health insurance for all the fighters on the UFC roster. But as you guys can expect, Dana didn't agree to any of that, and the talks broke down. The Predator left, and the UFC head honcho wasted no time in telling the world that Francis was afraid of going to battle with Jon. Ngannou, being the gentleman he is, didn't say much in response, and kept telling people why he would have called Jones out in the first place if he didn't want to fight him. After the Predator secured a record deal with Professional Fighters League, Dana resumed his smear campaign, saying how it would have been the same result for Jon against Francis as it was for Gane. To be honest, the UFC boss does sound a little salty, and it's not just Ngannou either. He talks like that about everyone who defies him, because a couple of years ago, Uncle Dana was saying the same stuff about Jon Jones. Helwani played clips of White talking about Francis. Back in 2021, he held him in very high regard and kept talking about how the guy is always ready to fight. In fact, the Predator apparently regularly called Dana to ask him to set up new matches. Ngannou was the one pushing for the Jones fight, and Dana wanted more than anything to make it happen. Jon wasn't ready though, and kept asking the UFC for more money. It was the boss who told people that Mr. Bones was afraid to fight Francis, and that money was just an excuse Jon was using to run from a similar fate as Stipe. Ariel did this to remind the fans how Dana changes his narrative to throw the guy who doesn't agree with him under the bus. The UFC boss hates the Predator so much, he didn't even come out to put the belt around his waist after he won against Ciryl. Later, he claimed to have been called backstage because he had to take care of something urgent. I have a feeling that soon it's going to be Miocic who'd be in the same position, because that's how White operates. But with Ngannou, it feels a lot more personal. And Dana didn't just stop at calling him a coward. He also started questioning the legitimacy of the PFL deal. White said that the deal made zero sense to him, because why would the PFL pay a guy who's not going to fight for a year? All the promotion would be doing right now is going to be paying Ngannou to train for a boxing match, which might never happen. Anthony Joshua is the latest elite heavyweight boxer linked with the former UFC champ, but the Brit doesn't seem all that interested in a match with Francis right now. That's understandable, given that he'd want to chase guys like Tyson Fury down for the title fight. Joshua said that any match with an MMA guy would be nothing more than a gimmick, and that was just more ammunition for Dana to use against Ngannou. The UFC boss said that the Cameroonian thought he had some deal like Conor McGregor had with Floyd Mayweather, but that wasn't the case. Dana added that Francis believes there's more money in boxing matches, but that isn't always true. He also said that boxing is full of gimmicky fights, and Francis can try all he wants, but it's never really gonna work out. The irony is that a couple of days after saying this, Uncle Dana wanted Tyson Fury to fight in the octagon. A comment from Joe Rogan on how John will destroy the Gypsy King started all of this. Fury wasn't pleased with that, and went on a rant on how no man can stop him. Jones stepped in challenging him to a fight in the UFC, and Dana backed his champion up. He even told Tyson to give him a call if he ever wanted to settle that debate. This didn't go unnoticed by Helwani, who called out the UFC president for hypocrisy. The host of the podcast talked about how White can dismiss Joshua versus Francis on one hand and still talk about throwing Fury into the cage against John. According to Ariel, there's not much difference between either of those two fights, and Dana's only dismissive of Ngannou because he doesn't have the right to promote him for a fight anymore. I mean, what's more hypocritical than throwing a boxer in the octagon with a mixed martial artist? If anything, it would have at least been a little more even in the boxing ring than it'd be in the cage. Unsurprisingly, this isn't the only gimmick Dana has pulled over the years. Helwani pointed out that the UFC invited a pro wrestler CM Punk over and made him fight twice in a very badly failed experiment. Then there's also the BMF title. Ariel thinks that the title means nothing and that Dana's only putting it up because he has no champions to headline the pay-per-view event of UFC 291. So just for the sake of it, the UFC resurrected a title that Dana said won't ever see the light of day. If that isn't fraudulent enough for you, then think about the slap fighting. This is the guy who gets a couple of untrained civilians to smack the crap out of each other and tries to sell them on pay-per-view. The competitors get concussions and lacerations, but Dana doesn't care because he's promoting something that needs no real training with next to no safety measures in place. Having done all of this and more, Dana doesn't get to discredit Ngannou's efforts into making something of himself outside the shadow of the UFC. So from ripping into the UFC boss for promoting gimmicks to putting the record straight for Francis Ngannou's absence from the octagon, this was why Ariel Helwani blasted Dana White.